of verse 73, as you yourself admitted.
It doesn't. That's not talking about the Trinity. They are the people who say that God is a three, Nagdemon.
It doesn't go back to verse 72, but it goes back to the people of verse 73, the exact verse that rebukes Trinitarians for believing Allah is part of a Trinity. But now you do a 180 because you didn't see the implications of your earlier words. But now you have come to see that if they, in verse 75, refers back to verse 73, the Trinitarians, your Allah is wrong, and this can only be talking about the same subject as the beliefs of the Trinitarians in verse 73. That's why you give us a different reading now, blatantly contradicting your previous reading where you connected verse 75 to verse 73 and accusing me of being dense for not seeing that. This shows that if you read the verses as an unbiased reader that has no axe to grind, you end up reading verse 73 through 75 as an argument against the Trinity. It is only when you spot the problem and want to desperately vindicate Allah of His blatant error that you will try to find a way around the problem, which results in contradicting your previous claims and an acontextual reading of the text at hand.
Okay? So now he addresses Jesus not being God. The Messiah, son of Mary, was only a messenger. So now this actually ties back to verse 72. Not verse 73, but verse 72, reiterating once again that Jesus is not God. Messengers before him had indeed passed away, and his mother was a truthful woman. Now, again, as I mentioned in the last video, he takes an issue with the mention of Mary being truthful. But why does the law say truthful? He could have said anything. He could have said Mary is just a woman. Mary was a good woman. He could have said anything, but instead he uses the word truthful. Why? Because, as we pointed out, that she had been charged with bringing something strange in chapter 19. She had been charged with bringing something strange, and the people were like, you know, Mary, you come from a good line of family. How could you do something like this? You see? And then to prove that she speaks the truth, she points to Jesus in the cradle, and he miraculously speaks, defending his mother, thereby proving that she had indeed spoken the truth and obviously was a truthful woman. And so what he does here is create a straw man argument, claiming that I said that he says she's a truthful woman to vindicate her in front of the Christians. And I never said that.
I didn't say Mary was vindicated before the Christians. That's what you are saying if your reading is correct. Because first you said that they in verse 75 are the disbelievers in verse 73, which are Christians.
Referring to Jesus and his mother. And then it says, see how we make the messages clear to them. Who's them, my friend? Them is the people who disbelieve in verse 73.
But you later said that Mary was mentioned as a truthful woman to vindicate her from the charge of having an affair, that she didn't lie about the virgin birth.
So Allah is clarifying that Jesus is only the Messiah, and that his mother was a truthful woman, meaning she did not lie about the miracle birth, that she did not have an affair or whatever.
So if those that were given the sign and turned away from it are the same people that say that Allah is the third of three, then it must mean that this is addressing Christians. Therefore, this is a vindication before Christians, since Christians supposedly turned away from Mary having no affair, and thus Allah is seeking to set the record straight. Which Christians are turned away from the fact that Mary never had an affair. But now, with your newly found reading, that this is telling Christians something they already knew, namely that Mary was a truthful woman that never had an affair, you not only contradicted yourself again, but you ended up contradicting the Quran as well. Because the Quran says that we turned away from Mary's innocence. That is, if your reading is correct. So now you are saying that this verse says Mary was innocent, which Christians already believed, trying to justify that reading with Surah 33 verse 45. Yet the Quran says that we have turned away In other words, we didn't already believe that Mary was innocent. That is, if your reading is correct. But the fact that you have to run all the way to Surah 19 to try to justify your reading of Surah 5 verse 75, which leads to a completely acontextual reading, speaks volumes. You cannot justify verse 75 by the context it is in. So you take a random argument from a totally different text and which has nothing to do with the subject Allah is addressing in Al-Ma'idah. So folks, here is Shadid's argument. When it talks about Jesus in verse 75, it goes back to verse 72. At verse it was 73, but now it's 72 in context. But when it mentions Mary, it talks about the text all the way back to Surah 19. Now it makes sense. So instead of going to the immediate context of verse 72 to 74, we have to go all the way to Surah 19 to understand what Allah is talking about. Right. And you know that how, Shadid? Did Allah give you this explanation? Or did Allah's Rasul give you this brilliant reading? No. So no explanations from your God, no explicit words from your Prophet. Then how did you get to this reading? Oh, you made it up yourself. Aha. So you are pretty sure that you reading it this way isn't just a convenient way to dodge the problem of the immediate context of verse 75. Right, Shadid? I mean, sorry guys, but you all can see what's going on here. Of course Allah is not making an argument in verse 75 about some event in Surah 19.
I said he just states that she's a truthful woman, reiterating what was said before in the Quran, that when she had came to her people and they charged her, that she was indeed a truthful woman. That's all. As I showed, it's not unusual. It's nothing. It's no problem for Allah to reiterate something, even if the people already accept that as a truth, as I showed with how he spoke to the Prophet. Plus, it could also relate to speaking to the Jews, because as I showed you, the context of these verses actually start at verse 67. The full context is from verse 67 to verse 77. It is addressing the people of the book, both Jews and Christian. He deals with the problems with the Jews and the problems with the Christians. Before he gets to the problem with the Christians, if you look at verse 70, he addresses the Jews. You see, he addresses the Jews in verse 70 and 71. And then he gets into what some of the Christians say about Jesus being God, about what some of them say about being three, and in verse 75, clearly stating that Jesus is the Messiah, and that his mother was a truthful woman, since, as we showed you, the directed audience is both Jews and Christians. So your argument has failed there.
Yes, indeed, your argument's indeed false. Shadid, stop saying that my arguments are false when I am the one providing the evidence that you are contradicting not only yourself, but Allah also, the one whose words you claim to explain. As I already said, those that were given the sign in verse 75, which according to your initial reading were Christians in verse 73, didn't believe in the innocence of Mary, since, according to Allah, they are turned away from it at the end of 75. That is, if your reading is correct, in that Mary is mentioned for the sole purpose of pointing out her innocence, or to tell people something they already knew. But then again, which Christians believe Mary was not innocent? Shadid, I ask you to clarify the text, not mess it up even more. You do know the difference between those two, don't you?
So he takes an issue that why is the law saying that? That, because the Christians don't charge that. As I already showed, it's not unusual for Allah to reiterate an accepted truth already. Once again, as I showed from chapter 33, verse 45, Allah states to the Prophet himself, he already has been receiving revelation already. He already has accepted and knows that he's the Prophet. Yet Allah says to him, O Prophet, surely we have sent you as a witness and a bearer of good news and a warner. Muhammad already knows he's the Prophet. He already knows that he's been sent as a witness and a bearer of good news and a warner. Yet Allah is stating this to him. Does it mean that Muhammad, was rejecting this? Does it mean he has to be vindicated to himself? No. So the argument is false. Plus, I never said that Allah was stating that she's a truthful woman to vindicate Mary in front of the Christians. I said, why does he use the word truthful woman? He could have used any other word. He could have said Mary was a good woman. Mary was a righteous woman. Mary was a woman who followed the laws of God. He could have said anything. Instead, he uses truthful. Why truthful? Why choose the word truthful when he could have just said she's a good woman or a righteous woman? I said truthful woman because this relates back to when she had been falsely charged by her people with committing an act of fornication. That's all. Allah doesn't have to vindicate her in front. He's just stating an obvious truth, and he uses the word truthful to relate back to that incident. So he uses truthful because, again, he could have said anything. He could have used any other word. Instead, he chooses truthful. And the only context that using truthful fits in is relating back to the incident when her people charged her. Doesn't mean that he has to vindicate her. He's just stating an obvious truth. The same way he states the Messiah at the beginning of the verse. Christians already accept the Messiah. Are you going to claim that I'm using this wrong, that he's vindicating Jesus as the Messiah in front of them? Come on. Sorry argument.
I say that is nonsense, since there is nothing in that text that would even hint to that. I say that the correct understanding is that she is a pious woman who was highly esteemed, as Ibn Abbas and Ibn Kathir explain it. That is what truthful means here. The text says that just as Jesus was a highly esteemed man, a messenger, not God, like all the other messengers, so also Mary was a highly esteemed pious woman, not God either, since they both ate food. This fits in the immediate context perfectly, but either way, your reading makes no sense. Let's examine it. According to you, Allah either mentions Mary to vindicate her before the Jews.
The text is referring to the people of the book and how the people of the book have made Jesus more than what he was, or how the Jews, they lie about Mary. Okay?
But then you have a problem, since you already said on Pal Talk that the sign of Mary and Jesus in verse 75 is given to the Christians in verse 73. Your other so-called explanation of the verse is that Allah is stating an obvious truth to the Christians about her miraculous conception of Yeshua, which is also problematic because then Allah would be accusing Christians of turning away from the belief of Mary's miraculous conception later in verse 75, which Christians never did. Your explanation makes Allah look even worse than it already does. As far as your sorry argument comment is concerned, you are the one that can't make up his mind whether it's talking about the Jews or the Christians in verse 75. Which group is it? Make up your mind and pick one so we can pin you down and deal with the argument. Since neither group will work for you, whose argument is actually sorry?
Okay, now the next thing is that, again, he says that the sign that they can, the sign in the verse about them eating food is that they are not members of the Trinity. As I already pointed out in the video previously, that no, this verse is dealing with Jesus. The context of this entire verse is about Jesus not being God. Okay, he is the son of Mary. Mary was a truthful woman. They both used to eat food.
So Shadid, how is it then not an attack on both their divinity? Since the argument is that they both used to eat food and both are just human, therefore both can be gods together in a Trinity with Allah. Amazing! Since the sign is that they are both human, then it attacks the divinity of both. But you keep stubbornly persisting that it's only an argument against the divinity of Yeshua, because you know that admitting that it's also an attack on Mary's divinity means that Allah didn't know what he was talking about. By the way, you already confirmed it anyway. That's why you keep contradicting yourself and end up making a bigger mess of the text. To think that you accused me of projecting bogus misreading into your holy book? I mean, please.